welcome back to our daily English news right here on TMH with me, your host, Ethiopian. As we move on to our main headlines for today, Tigrayan government have reiterated their willingness to fully cooperate with the independent investigations into any and all atrocities that have been committed with the conflict within Tigray. The critical levels of malnutrition said to be at an extreme high and exacting a huge toll because of the blockade that's been imposed on the Tigray region, and the Tigrayan diaspora in Germany on a 3-day demonstration in Munich, venue of annual Munich Security Conference. The main stories today: the government of Tigray reiterates its willingness to fully cooperate with independent investigation into any and all atrocities committed during the war on Tigray. It also called on Abiy Ahmed's regime to reconsider its unjustifiable insurgents and accept such an independent investigation. The government announcement in a response it issued to Amnesty International reports on the alleged human rights violations in the Amhara towns. The Amnesty International report on the 16th of February 2002 outlined an alleged extrajudicial killings, acts of sexual violence in the towns of Kobo and Chena and North Wello and North Gondar, respectively, from late August to early September of last year. To the degree that non-combatants have been victimized by any member of Tigray army, our heart goes out to the victims of such crimes, said the statement of the government of Tigray. The government of Tigray, in its investigation, finds the Tigrayan fighters have in fact deliberately targeted non-combatants. They will for sure bring the perpetrators to justice without pause. According to the statement, ultimate responsibility for whatever harm might have been done to civilians must, however, be laid at the feet of the criminal Abiy Ahmed regime and the expansionist Amhara elites. The statement noted that these forces, through incessant propaganda and reckless disregard for the social fabric of the country, have transformed a political conflict into a bloody, internecine war by mobilizing tens of thousands of poorly trained, untrained, ill-equipped, and even often unarmed civilians. The statement criticized Amnesty International for stripping the report of the necessary contextual background in their rush to accuse Tigrayan forces of war crimes for allegedly killing unarmed civilians, thereby painting, at best, a partial or even misleading picture of what might have actually transpired. Starting in early August, the Abiy Ahmed regime and Amhara authorities had called on the rest of the Ethiopians to confront Tigrayan forces with whatever weapons at their disposal. On August 10th, for instance, as the Associated Press reported, the Abiy Ahmed regime called on all capable citizens to fight in this Tigrayan war, as the AP rightly noted that is the call to arms, an ominous sign that all Ethiopia's 110 million people of them are being drawn into a conflict that had already claimed the lives of tens of thousands of people. During his televised appearance in an interwritten statement, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed called on citizens to be the eyes and ears of country in order to track down and expose spies as well as agents of the Tigrayan army. The dangerous call to arms was not made of the cuff, but as part of a strategy to whip up civilians into a frenzy, with a view to stopping our forces' advance by deploying human waves. The statement underlined, by priming unarmed civilians to engage in our forces, the regime put them at risk by blurring the line between combatants and non-combatants, thereby rendering impracticable the principle of distinction under the laws of war. The statement also alludes to similar irresponsible behavior by the Amhara regional government. The statement said Amnesty's report claims that Tigrayan fighters deliberately killed unarmed civilians, seemingly in revenge for losses among their ranks at the hands of the Amhara militia and armed farmers. Human Rights Watch had issued a similar report on both towns, with some details not found in the Amnesty report. In Kobo, Tigrayan forces were searching for weapons and chasing armed actors operating in the area, and according to HRW, in at least 2 villages, Gedameyu and Zobel, farmers responded by attacking the Tigrayan forces. This detail is consistent with the regime's call for civilians to confront our forces on the battlefield. Under the laws of war, Tigrayan forces had a legitimate right for self-defense. More significantly, during the period under consideration, There was an armed extremist group that confronted Tigrayan forces operating in the area at the direct behest of the Abiy Ahmed government. While this extremist group is not a formal element of the Ethiopian state, it is actively sponsored by the Ethiopian Security Services, as the statement indicated. The Abiy Ahmed regime and Amhara authorities are trying to gloss over the complicity in these crimes and even giving the direct role in sustaining these marauding gang of criminals by preemptively and baselessly blaming our forces for the atrocities committed by the group. In the fighting in Dabat, where Chana is located, thousands of unarmed civilians, including priests and other religious figures, carrying a tabot, or a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, came out to engage Tigrayan forces, and indeed the HRW report noted that some of the Chana villagers fought alongside the government soldiers, which under the law, again, of war would be directly participating in these hostilities. Again, both Amnesty and HRW, by downplaying the significance of the regime's de facto militarization of civilians, undermine the credibility of their own finding. The government of Tigray reiterated that Tigray's army does not condone the deliberate targeting of civilians. It also added it only believes as an independent investigation by an impartial international body can get to the bottom of all atrocities. It expressed its willingness to fully cooperate with the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia as it undertakes its independent investigation into and any all atrocities committed during the war on Tigray. It also called on the Abiy Ahmed regime to reconsider its unjustifiable intransigence and accept the legitimacy of the commission and extend a cooperative hand. Failing acceptance of the commission's legitimacy and willingness to cooperate with the Abiy Ahmed's regime, incessant noise about rights violation by Tigrayan forces will be nothing more than crocodile tears, as the statement emphasized. As we move on to our next news, critical levels of malnutrition said to be exacting a huge toll in the blockaded Tigray region. Health professionals say mothers and children are exposed to various illnesses due to critical malnutrition. Kabrom will present the story reported by Dimtsi Wayana. They told us her illness is caused by malnutrition. They displaced us, and we were in disarray. We were exposed to hunger.
According to health professionals, the hunger leads to birth of immature and underweight babies. The problem is huge. Particularly mothers and children are severely affected by malnutrition, which is exposing them to many illnesses. I don't have words to describe the severity of the problem. Some children have been born in less than 5 or 6 months of pregnancy. Some of them weigh 1.2 kilograms or less than a kilogram.
I have no milk or food to give my child, and she is now at a critical stage. More than 60,000 children under 5 and about 11,000 pregnant and lactating women in Tigray have been screened for malnutrition. Over 20% of the children and over 55% of the women were found to be acutely malnutritioned. The figure came out in an assessment for the second measles campaign within Tigray last week. In the past weeks, fewer than 7,000 people received food assistance, and this is what at the reduced rations of what is able to be able into the Tigray region because of the blockade imposed. Aid workers say the fuel shortage leaves Ethiopia's Tigray running on fumes. Most humanitarian aid has ground to a halt in Tigray because of the Ethiopian government's blockade of fuel into the region. Kabrom has more, report by the DivX.
The Ethiopian government has not allowed fuel into Tigray for humanitarian purposes since August, with the expectation of 2 World Food Program trucks in November. We're getting to a critical point where there's literally nothing left, said an aid worker who spoke to DevX on conditions of anonymity, fearing retribution from the government. It got to a point where we are just running on fume or have run out of completely. The World Health Organization was allowed to take medical supplies into Tigray this month. the first time since July. But the agency released a statement Monday saying it doesn't have fuel to make distributions to health centers. These supplies, which are only a portion of what's needed to respond to the health crisis in the region, sit unused in storage. The 15-month conflict has left people across Tigray, as well as the neighboring regions of Afar and Amara, with extensive needs. But the government blockade has singled out Tigray, which is home to its adversary, the Tigray Armed Forces. WFP estimates that 40% of those in Tigray are experiencing an extreme lack of food. Overall, humanitarian organizations need an estimate of 200,000 liters of fuel per week for their response activities. As of early February, WFP and other groups providing food assistance had less than 4,000 liters of fuel. An international humanitarian organization working in Ethiopia, which asked to remain anonymous due to the sensitivity of the situation, told Devex that the price of the available fuel is at one of the highest peaks since the beginning of the crisis, and we are having to restrict and prioritize movement as a result. The group wrote, fuel intervention operations such as water trucks and moving of supplies are becoming impossible. Water trucking operations will have to suspend very soon if more fuel is not brought in, which will have significant humanitarian consequence. Living across 131 sites, about 418,000 Ethiopians displaced within the region need water trucks that require 295 trips daily and 1,990 liters of fuel. On February 10, the UN reported that in the span of a week, water trucks dropped from severe of 143,000 people to just a little over 3,000. And the health system already is in a state of collapse, is set to be pummeled further. Health workers carrying out a measles campaign reportedly had to walk up to 35 kilometers because of the lack of fuel, staying at home within communities because they couldn't not travel back each day. A few months ago, 57 mobile health and nutrition teams were operating in Tigray, according to OSHA, but that figure was reduced to only 18 because of fuel and medicine shortage. Beyond fuel, the other main operation challenge for aid group is the ability to take cash into the region. Organizations are operating on credit and unable to pay staffers. The government has shut down banking services in Tigray, and humanitarian organizations need permission to take in even small amounts of cash from Addis Ababa, with multiple layers of bureaucracy and at the risk of denial. Even with that hustle, aid groups has said the cash is nowhere near enough to overcome operational expenses. Beyond aid delivery, what the region really needs is for its commercial market to become functional, according to the aid workers. That strangulation of Tigray remains in place, the aid workers said.
Welcome back. The Tigrayan diaspora in Germany are on a 3-day demonstration in Munich, where the annual Munich Security Conference is being currently held. The Tigrayan from all over Germany have covered and converged in Munich to protest against the ongoing genocidal war in the Tigray region. They called on all world leaders not to support the genocide enablers like Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki. Let's take a listen.
Enough is enough. 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 Thank you. The third point. Tagarus are still in prison. Many Tagarus have been arrested in a systematic fashion. That is exactly like what an apartheid system would do. The world has really not paid attention to that, and I'm not talking about a few hundreds, but we're talking thousands. To go to Tigray again and further kill people and again expand the genocide. That's unacceptable. Now the world is again giving a deaf ear to what Isaias Afwerki is doing in Tigray. Now what we would want them to do is to put an unconditional term that Isaias Afwerki withdraws his forces from Tigray. Eritrean forces out of 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 Tigray. Actually, the number of people that are dead in Tigray is heavily underestimated. We're not talking in the range of thousands, or in tens of thousands. So.
The demonstrators also called for unhindered humanitarian access to be allowed into Tigray and to end the siege and the bombing of civilians, as well as to release all Tagaru that have been detained solely because of their identity during the state of emergency. The organizers said that the rally will last at least 3 days in a stretch for the period of a high-profile Munich Security Conference, which is being held amidst a plethora of current crises around the entire globe and significant risk for further escalation as well. Writer and activist Yosef Gebrehiyot says Tigray has been turned into a huge concentration camp by Abiy Ahmed government and his allies. Kebrom has more on this story.
Yosef Gebrehiyot, who is known for his writings and analysis on issues of the Horn of Africa, in his interview with Mekele Foresights, despite a situation where a whole region is turned into a huge concentration camp with the intention of exterminating millions of Tigrayans. This, he said, is unprecedented in the history of the world.
What makes it different in Tigray is that you don't need to move the 6 million people that are living in Tigray into a different concentration camp. That is not necessary. And the people would also resist. That's what the war is all about. The Tigray people are resisting. So the best way for the Ethiopian government to do is to encircle Tigray as it is right now, being encircled, conducting a siege against Tigray, and through the denial of all kinds of services, especially medicine and food, slowly exterminate as much as possible many people through starvation and disease. That is the aim of this concentration camp. You don't need a barbed wire, to surround Tigray. You don't need walls like in Auschwitz, for example, to surround the interned people. All that you have to do is surround them the way it has been surrounded now.
According to Yosef, the preparation to turn Tigray into a concentration camp had been done in the 8 months all the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces and their Amhara allies were in Tigray, during which they destroyed livelihoods and infrastructures. He added, once these forces were forced out of Tigray, they completed the siege. He criticized the UN and the Western countries for humanizing Abiy Ahmed's government by deliberately downplaying the atrocities and shifting genocidal intentions away from him.
The definition of genocide, there is two ends to it. The deed itself has to be seen, as a huge humanitarian crisis. For example, if people die of starvation, let's say if 500,000 people die of starvation, that would count as genocide, but only if there was an intention from the government itself. The UN has yet to call it a famine, let alone a genocide. If it doesn't call it a famine or a genocide, then it's not a famine or a genocide. So you don't even have the deed itself, let alone the intention to attach to the deed. The very idea of entering into the concentration camp to examine what is going on in there presupposes that there is no concentration camp in the very beginning. Because all the evidence that you need is it could be seen from the outside.
Yosef Gebrehiyot explained how the Western countries, especially Europe, have been manipulated by the politics of numbers into sacrificing the people of Tigray for economic consideration and fear of migration resulting from the possible implosion of Ethiopia.
Thank you for all of you who have been tuned in with me. That concludes our news for today. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.